Welcome to the QuickSight Learning Series. Today's topic is building your first dashboard with Amazon QuickSight and will be led by Solution Architect Kelly Burton. My name is Jill Florent and I'm on the Customer Success team just to help you with a couple of early details. We're going to cover today topics that are going to be of great interest to people new to QuickSight. So we'll go through what QuickSight can do for you and then how to go through step by step and build your very first dashboard, including connecting and preparing data, making visuals interactive, and publishing and sharing completed dashboards. You'll also learn how to build a Q topic, which is our natural language query capability. One of the things that we're going to do for today's pre-recorded session is make sure that if you have questions that we help you get answers. So we're going to have experts standing by in our newly relaunched QuickSight community, which you can access at community.amazonquicksite.com. This QR code will take you directly to that URL if you want to take a moment to take a picture of that. Now would be a great time for that. You also can ultimately access this from your QuickSight homepage on the lower left corner. So one of the things that I would call out if you didn't know that there was a QuickSight community is that this is a great place to learn and connect with other people who are QuickSight users. So when you go to the QuickSight community, you will have to register with an Amazon.com account to get started. And then you can click on the question and answer area. And if you had a question, let's say you wanted to know, could I make dynamic titles for donut charts? I can actually look at the topics that are already here and see that this question about, is it possible to have a dynamic title on a donut chart with the user changing their selection and the title changing based on the selection? The answer to that is yes. And then there are a couple of links here that goes to the details on how to do that with our parameters and even a video about dynamic titles. Now, if I wanted to create a question that is not yet already asked and answered, what I can do is I can click on New Question and just give it a title and what I want the question to be. I would encourage you for today, because we have our solutions architects and moderators looking for any questions that come in during today's session. So please add the title QLS-dashboard to give your question priority on the community during today's time together. And then you can simply post that new question to the community. Again, this is going to be a great place to maybe bookmark and come back to if you have subsequent questions, but for today, this will be where you can get your questions answered. And I would also call out that we are going to post this video to the QuickSight YouTube channel, which is also another great place to bookmark. So with that, I would say take it away, Kelly. We're excited to learn about building your first QuickSight dashboard.
Thank you, Jill. I am excited to be here today to help you learn about building your first dashboard with Amazon QuickSight. As we look at our agenda for today, we're going to start by reviewing the actual finished dashboard we're going to build. Our focus and mission today is to provide our users a dashboard to understand shelter intake and adoption metrics by a variety of different attributes. After we look at that final dashboard, we're going to peel back the covers and begin from scratch. We're going to start by connecting to and preparing data. We'll then add visuals, calculation, and provide interactivity. Next, we'll talk about enhancing your dashboard to give your users the best end-user experience. And finally, we'll publish and share your dashboard to your users. Once your dashboard is complete, what happens next? Your users begin using it, they gain some great insights, but then they start having more questions. Well, I wonder, can I look further back in time? Can I look across another dimension? Could you add more visuals for me? So with QuickSight, as an author, you have the opportunity to provide self-service analytics for your users as well, with a component called QuickSight Q. So we'll take a step and look at building a QuickSight Q topic to allow your users to ask questions across all your data and use that to augment your dashboard. Finally, I'll turn it back over to Jill for next steps on how you can grow your information and knowledge within QuickSight. So let's take a look at this final dashboard we're going to build. So here we see we've got some key metrics available to us, a great snapshot of one of our long-term guests looking for a home. And we can see we've got our average days at the shelter for all pets is 18. We can see our performance metrics this year compared to last year. And the data we'll be working with today is through the end of May of 2022. We can look at how age group affects and determines who's in the shelter. We can see we have a lot of senior guests in our shelter. We can look at the trend of intake. We can look at forecast values here in the yellow. So QuickSight provides those deeper insights and make those available to users. We can see pit bull mix are breeds that are typically coming in to the shelter. And we can look at a pivot table here at the bottom and drill up and down hierarchies and have key metrics focused and pushed to us. Here we can see, particularly in our senior category in first and second quarter of this year, that we're definitely taking in more seniors than we're adopting out. If I want to go a little deeper and we look at interactivity, we've got filtering we can do. I can make some selections here on age group as we set up an action. And I can see here in the center that I've got some key animals that we really focus on to find these folks a home. So Chico's been in the shelter over 500 days. What can we do to find him a new family? So lots of flexibility in quickly being able to push information out to our users. So this is a dashboard we're going to build today. So let's get started. I'm going to begin by going into the QuickSight console. So as an author, I'm going to focus on three key components today. The ability to create a data set, to build an analysis, and then publish that analysis into a dashboard. So let's begin by accessing our data. First, I'm going to create a new data connection. As I can see, I've got a variety of different connectors available within QuickSight. I can connect to AWS sources, other SaaS-based sources, upload files. I'm going to choose my shelter data is located in a Redshift database. So I'm going to create a new Redshift data source. Point to it and provide my password and create that data source. As I create the data source, it asks me what schema I would like to access. I also have the opportunity to provide custom SQL for this connection as well. I'm going to look at my shelter intakes table and make a selection. And now I'm going to choose to edit and preview that data. That brings it into the data manager and provides a preview at the bottom. So now I have my information about shelter intakes, but I also want to make sure I can provide metrics on adoptions and outcomes of the shelter as well. So I need to go and add some data. So I'm going to go add data and choose the source of that data. I'm going to go against the existing source, which is my Redshift source that I just created. And I'm going to go and grab my outcomes table. So now I have shelter intakes and outcomes. I'm going to set up the drawing criteria, and I'm going to say animal ID is my key field in this particular combination. I'm going to apply that so I can have an understanding of animals that are still in the shelter as well as those that have been either adopted or transferred. I can see the preview at the bottom that's got all the data available to me. On the left-hand side, here are all the fields within the data set. I can take the time here and change the names to make those, take out the underscores, use capitalization to make those names look nicer from a reporting standpoint. I'll also have the opportunity to do that within some of the properties of the visuals when we create analysis as well. Just pointing that out here. As I look, I've got a number of fields that are the same in both tables. So I'm going to go ahead and exclude those duplicate fields from my output data set. So now I've got a good mix of fields. I've also noticed that in this case, I've got a number of different animal types at the shelter. I've got dogs, I've got cats, I've likely have reptiles as well. And I want this dashboard just to focus on dogs. So I'm going to set up a filter and say we're only care about the dogs here. So this filter will apply at the data set level. So we'll only see data coming in for dogs. As I look at the preview data below, I've got some interesting metrics. I've got the intake type. I can see the age, so the individual age of the animal. But I do know we're going to want to look at things by groupings, like puppy or young adult or senior. So it looks like I need to add a calculated field to account for those age groupings. So within the data set, I can add calculated fields. When I do this, I give it a name. And here this brings up the editor. You can see on the right-hand side, I have access to all the fields within the data set. I can utilize a number of functions as well. If I'm not sure which function I want to use, I can make a selection, and I can see some details provided at the bottom. And I can also learn more and go straight to the documentation that provides examples. In our case, I'm creating this age group filter, and I've already built this out just so for the sake of time. So we're going to look at assigning an age range. So if our intake date and the date of birth is less than 1, we're going to say this animal is a puppy age group. If they're greater than 9 years old, we're going to say they're seniors. So just being able to use some if-else logic and a date difference function to define those age group parameters. I'm going to save my calculated field. Notice it shows up on the left-hand side, and I'll scroll across in my preview, and now I have my age group available to me. I also want to be able to calculate and utilize in my visuals would be the days at the shelter. So the number of days an animal spent at the shelter. So I want to add another calculated field. And we're going to call this one days at shelter. And again, this is another one that's going to require some if-else logic. And remember, our data goes just through the 30th of May of this year. So that's why I'm using a particular date here. So as we're calculating days at shelter, we're using an if-else again. We're going to say if outcome type is not null, then we're going to look at intake date, the difference between the income date and the outcome date, and that'll give us the total days of that animal in the shelter. Otherwise, we're going to look at the difference between May 30th, which is the last date that we have data for, and the intake date, because we know that animal is still currently in the shelter. So that will calculate our days at the shelter. And we're going to go ahead and save that calculation. So now we've got a couple of calculations created at the dataset level. So as we publish that dataset, those calculations will always be available to all our users of this dataset. At this point, I'm ready to publish and visualize. When I choose Publish and Visualize, it takes me into an analysis, imports the data, and I can see the fields list on the left-hand side. I have an autograph, so QuickSight is going to make some assumptions on what makes sense to build as you select fields. You also have the ability to select specific visual types as you build. The goal of the dashboard that we're building today, first, is to make sure we can understand the trend of intakes and potentially forecast what intakes will be coming in to make sure we have the space and supplies for those animals. We also want to be able to understand some key performance indicators and understand, what is the average shelter stay and how do we compare adoptions this year versus last year. And finally, we want to be able to allow our user to be able to look at adoption metrics and shelter stays by a number of different attributes, such as age group or breed. So those are the focus areas for our dashboard. So let's begin our build. I'm going to start by selecting intake date, and we can see QuickSight assumes I want to look at a line chart here. So I'm looking at the count of records by intake date. Let's change that to a weekly metric. And I want to look at my animal count for intakes coming in each week so I can see my trend. So I've got my trend available to me in the line chart. And now with QuickSight, it's very easy to add a forecast to this as well. So with QuickSight, we offer authors the ability to add that forecast directly within the visuals. And so you have that forecast metric. Notice I've got data coming in from September 13th. I can use my zoom if I want to narrow that down. So lots of flexibility with the look and feel. With my forecast properties, I can control how many periods out I want to forecast, and if I'd like to use backwards forecasting as well. As we look at the trend chart, I can see I do have data from 2013 on, and I'm really interested in data for the last couple of years. So I'm going to add a filter on my intake date. And I'm going to use relative dates for this filter and say I'm just interested in the last 2 years of data, and I'm going to go ahead and include my null values. I'm also going to, by default, I'm only applying the filter to this visual, but I want to go ahead and make sure that's applied to all applicable visuals as I continue to build out my dashboard. So now that my filter is applied, I'm going to continue to build out my visuals. In order to create the KPIs that I want, I need to add a few more calculated fields. We added calculated fields earlier at the dataset level, but I can also add calculated fields at the analysis level. We want to calculate the number of animals in the shelter. So we're going to do a distinct count of our animals where our outcome type is null, which means there's no outcome type, so the animal is in the shelter, and so we'll keep that. I'm going to go ahead and copy this as well. So we'll save that. I'm going to add a calculated field for animals that have been adopted. The formula is going to look very similar, only in this case, it's going to be if outcome type equal adoption is when we want to do the account. Save this one. And then finally, we want to add one more calculated field that tells us the overall average days at the shelter for all animals. And so with that, we're going to use an average over function to give us the days at the shelter for all animals before any filters are applied. So now that we have our additional calculated fields available to us, let's add a visual. We're going to look at a KPI, and we want this one to be the average days at the shelter. I'm going to change that to a whole number because we're talking about days. And I'll make this just a little bit smaller. I'm going to add another visual. Again, we're looking at a KPI. This time we want to see the number of animals adopted. And we'd like to look at that as a year-over-year comparison. So we can add that year in our trend group and take a look at our year-over-year comparison. So we're down by 2,000 animals. I would really like to see that as a percent. Every visual has the ability to get to settings with a property sheet. And in this case, I'm going to change it to percent and have the ability to see we're at 35% of adoptions compared to total of last year. We've seen how we can add visuals to an analysis or a dashboard, but QuickSight also gives you the ability to add insights as well. So here we see we have the line charts selected, if we go to Insights, QuickSight's offering some suggestions on what may be interesting tidbits of information to add to our dashboard. You can see we have highest week, week over week change, we've got a growth rate metric, as well as some anomaly and forecast details. In our case, let's add the growth rate insight to our dashboard. By just selecting the plus sign, it adds that to our dashboard, and we can see our 4-week compound growth rate is just under 25%. So we are going down as far as intakes, which is positive to know. Another way we can add insights to our dashboard is to be able to go up and add our own insight here at the top, and we get to choose the computation for that insight. So you can see we have a lot of different choices available for that computation. Let's say we want to look at the top breeds that are coming into the shelter. So we're going to do a top rank computation. And you can see once we do that, it says us we have to select a particular category. So let's select breed. Once we do that, the insight is configured for us. So it goes out and calculates the top 3 breeds by, in this case, record count or distinct count for those particular breeds. If we want flexibility over the text that's provided or additional computations within an insight, we have the ability to customize the narrative. So here in the Edit Narrative screen, you can see the narrative that has been created for this particular computation, the ranked computation. If we just want to change the label or the text describing that computation, we can do that. So if I want to say, top 3 breeds for intake count are, I can just change the text, and you can see that reflected in the preview. You also have the ability to add additional computations. So if you want not only the top 3 breeds, but the bottom 3 breeds, if you want to look at the top 3 weeks or top 3 months of where animal intake is highest. If you want to add a completely different computation, you have that flexibility in the narrative. We have a lot of customers that use this narrative to create a nice flow of summary statistics or metrics to be seen on a dashboard. We can save that. I'm also going to go into the properties for this individual insight and take the title off. So now we've got our breeds, top 3 breeds insight. We've got a couple of KPIs, as well as our growth rate metric. We've got some great information coming on the dashboard. And notice as I'm adding different visuals or insights, the layout just kind of snaps to, and it's very easy to add visuals. And so by default, we start building in a tiled layout. But if we want more control over that layout, we can switch to freeform. This allows you to place visuals anywhere, including on top of each other. So let's take a look and switch to the freeform layout. I'm going to apply that, and notice now I have the grid in the background. This is going to allow me a little more flexibility as I choose how to lay out the different objects on the screen. So at this point, I'm going to take just a moment, and I'm going to make sure my KPIs are on top. With a little bit of sizing done here. So I've got my KPIs, and I think I will also at this point just move this down a touch and add my top 3 breeds here and my growth rate metric. And we're going to spend a little more time in this next section once we get all our visuals on the screen talking about enhancing the layout. So here we go. So now that we've got KPIs on the screen, we've got some insights, we've got our forecast and our trend, we want to be able to start looking at different attributes and how those are reflected for the intake and the adoption metrics. So let's add a visual. In this case, I'm going to create a word cloud. So here on the bottom, I'm just going to select a word cloud. And I want to look at age group, and I want to see the animals in the shelter by age group. And I can see the bulk of the animals in the shelter right now are seniors. So interesting metric. I wonder, does that mean a different age group is primarily getting adopted, or do we just have a lot of seniors going in and going out? So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this visual because I really like that word cloud look. And then I'm just going to change my metric from animals in shelter to animals adopted in this other word cloud. So we do see we have primarily young adults and puppies being adopted out. So may find a focus area with our seniors. If we want to be able to start with that interactivity, and I mentioned earlier, lots of ways to interact and allow users to interact with your dashboard. If we want users to be able to select a particular age group and have that filter all the other visualizations of the screen, we can incorporate an action. So we can say, let's create an action to filter all the visuals on the screen when I make a selection in this particular visual. So by adding this action, when I select senior, I'm going to see the metrics reflected only for that particular age group across all my visuals. There are a lot of different types of actions you can add. Here we're showing a filter action, but we also provide URL actions where you can launch another URL and pass different filters and parameters, as well as a navigation action if you want to navigate to different sheets within the same dashboard. So we've got a couple of word clouds on. Let's add another visual. And this time, let's look at a Sankey diagram. This is one of my favorite ways to look at metrics to quickly get an idea of relationships. So let's take a look at age group and outcome type. Something we haven't provided yet on our dashboard is the outcome type. So what happens to these animals? So here we can see from a young adult perspective, it looks like just over half do get adopted. We can see if some are transferred, and then some are also returned to owner. So very quickly we can see, and on the outcome type, we can see the bulk of our animals are adopted. About 20% transferred, and then as well, maybe about 25% returned to owner. So very easy to quickly understand what's going on in relationship to the categories of data. One last component we're going to add to our dashboard is a pivot table. So let's add one more visual. And I'm going to put the pivot table at the bottom here. I'm going to go ahead and select pivot table. And in our pivot table, we're going to look at animal type and age group. We'll take a look at that by intake date. And I want to look at the quarter aggregation. And then we want to look at the animals that are coming in. So this gives me an idea of the animals that are coming into the shelter. Just interesting, but I want to give my users more. What I'm really interested in is, are we adopting out, what percent of the animals are we adopting out that we're in, that we're bringing in to see, are we really facilitating finding these animals homes? So it looks like I need to create one more calculated field. So I'm going to go ahead and create a calculated field, and we're going to call this adopt versus intake percent. And our calculation for this, we're going to look at animals adopted divided by the distinct count of our total animals. And we'll save this, and we'll go ahead and add this to our pivot table. And so let's also make this a percent. So this is great. So we can immediately see that if we look close enough that from our senior age group, this quarter, we have a really low adopt versus intake ratio. I would really like to make sure those metrics get brought out and really pushed to the user so they immediately see it and they don't have to dig for it. So let's add some conditional highlighting, conditional formatting to this particular table. So we're going to use our adopt versus intake metric, and let's add an icon. And we're going to say if it's greater than 50%, I want to color it green. Between 25 and 50, let's say yellow, and less than 25, let's do red. And we can immediately see that applied. I would really like to see the overall metrics as well. So let's add, we could add totals or subtotals for our rows and columns. So we've got our total metrics. And then if we want to apply conditional highlighting at those different levels, we have choices to be able to apply where we apply that conditional highlighting. So I'm going to go ahead and select to add that conditional highlighting to the totals and see that reflected. So now we're really pushing that information out so the user can immediately identify those red areas to focus. Another way to format the pivot table to truly bring out more detail to the user is using the property settings. So here, by selecting the properties of the pivot table, I can go in and edit the title. So maybe I want to go ahead and call this age group, intake metrics, and we'll say intake versus adopt metrics. Maybe we want to make this bold and a bigger font. We'll save that. If we want to go into the headers, particularly the column headers, I'm going to center those and maybe give them a background color of a light gray. So that looks good. So lots of flexibility on how you do that. And then you can spend as much time as you want. Remember when we brought the data set in, we didn't spend any time, renaming the fields, taking out the underscores and such. So you can do that from a labeling perspective in the properties of the pivot table. So it looks a little nicer to your end users. So very easy to add some customizations for look and feel. So here we are, we spent a few minutes and we have a number of visuals added to our dashboard. We've covered the ability to add visuals such as KPIs, trend charts, forecasting, looking at word clouds. We've added some interactivity with the ability to select one of the age groups in the words cloud and watch that filter be applied. We can also add filters directly to the sheet as well. So for example, if we wanted the user to be able to select a particular color of animal and look at the analysis, we can do that. I can apply a color filter to all the visuals of this sheet. And then we can have the choice to add that to the sheet. So once I add it to the sheet, I can see I have my filter box here. And I can choose to place that wherever I want on the dashboard. We're in free-form layout, so I can, I can see it's allowing me to actually overlay that onto other visuals as well. So lots of flexibility in the ability to provide filtering, to provide interactivity. And so at this point, we've got a lot of great information on our dashboard. The content that we have meets the criteria that we outlined, being able to create the forecast and understand the trend, be able to allow users to look at metrics by different attributes. So we've accomplished our goal as far as the content of the dashboard. What we need to do next is focus on enhancing the look and feel of that dashboard. Themes are one way to enhance the look and feel of the overall dashboard. With themes, you have the ability to select a certain theme and have that applied. With QuickSight, you can edit a particular theme. 3 themes are given to you with QuickSight, and you have the ability to edit those themes through the theme editor, give the theme a name, and then you get to choose primary background colors, foreground colors, the data color scheme that you'd like to use. Lots of flexibility in the layout options as well as settings. So once you've designed the theme that you'd like to use, you just save that theme, and it'll be available within your My Theme section of the theme selector. So here we're choosing the shelter theme that I have defined with gray backgrounds, as well as that dark blue color as my primary. The next component we're going to look at, we're talking about, is to really utilize that freeform layout. So with freeform layout, I can overlay visuals. So I'm going to start taking advantage of that to really draw interest from my users to be able to make the best use of screen space and make my dashboard very flexible for my users. So I'm just doing a little bit of changing things around just a bit for just a moment, because what I do want to do is I would like to add an image to my dashboard. And that image is one of our shelter guests. So I'm going to go ahead and add a visual. And I'm going to make it a custom visual. And I can provide a URL to that image that I want to include in my dashboard. And I'm going to do some settings. And there we have one of our longtime shelter guests who are really helping us focus this dashboard to get people's attention. So I've got this image. I'm going to include that as I'm going to move this up in my dashboard. So now it's just a matter of working through the layout options to lay this dashboard out how it makes the most sense for our users to make it user-friendly. So here I am. I'm going to add the image at the top. And I'd really like to see those average shelter days here. So let me go ahead and take this KPI and let's move it here. I'm going to go into my settings. First, I'm going to bring this forward. Front. Then I'm going to change my title. Average days at shelter. And I want to make that extra large. And maybe center it. And we'll save this. I'm also going to go into my style and I'm going to turn off the background color, the border color, and the selection color of my KPI. So that allows me to have my metric right on screen. So right on top of my image. So I really like that. What I would like to do though, my number isn't really showing up against the black picture of the animal. So I'm going to go ahead and apply some conditional formatting to this particular text and just say if the value is greater than 1, which we know those average days are always going to be greater than 1. I'm going to change the color to white and apply, just so that really pops out on the dashboard. So I can immediately see, average days at the shelter is 18. Now I'm going to go ahead and take my adoption KPI and move it over just a bit. So that looks pretty good. now I think I'm going to move my word clouds down over here. So I'm going to move my few other things out of the way. And you can see how easy it is with that freeform layout. I can just overlay objects as I'm getting the layout the way I want. So we'll fit this word cloud in. I'll go grab this word cloud. That looks pretty good. Okay, I think maybe I'll make my... Okay, that looks good. So that wasn't all the way to the top, so let's go back all the way to the top of the images. Send this one to the back. Back up. There we go. So here we can see, just spending a little bit of time here, getting it just the way we want, as far as look and feel. So that spacing looks great. I'm going to work with my color filter over here. I'm going to go ahead and add our insight for breed over here as well. And I'm going to resize my sand key. Perfect. It's going to go up a bit, isn't it? Then I'll grab my trend chart, put it right here on top. And with my trend chart, here's where I like to go in and to the properties as well. We'll rename it intake trend. And then you can choose to spend as much result time as you want, but I like to take my axis lines off and my labels of both my X and my Y and get those grid lines off there. And then for me, I like the way that looks, and I can add my insights directly over top of my trends. I'm going to go into the properties of this insight. Send this one to the back. Go to the properties of my insight, into the style, and I'm going to take off my background color, my border color, and my selector color. So my overlay looks nice. I'll move this around just a little bit more to get it just the way I want it. So that looks pretty good. I think I'll move the pivot table up. And I've got a space here. I'll work to do here. Might change the title of my sand key versus outbound. After enhancing our dashboard, we've identified some additional screen space where we can take it one step further and really focus on those animals who need help finding a home, those animals who have been in the shelter a long time. So let's add another visual to our dashboard. This visual is going to be a table visual. And I'm going to take that table visual and place it in our open space here in our dashboard. In this visual, we want to see the animal ID, the animal name, likely the age group, the breed, and the number of days at the shelter. And let's convert this days at shelter to a measure. So that we have that identified, so we have the table there, so we're going to be able to see those animals. I want to do a couple of things because I want to make sure those are really highlighted. First, I need to apply a filter on this particular visual that says I only want to see animals who have been at the shelter over 20 days. So I'm going to set up that filter. And we're going to say if the days at the shelter is greater than 20, then I want to show those animals in this table. So now that I have my filter applied, I have the ability to see those animals. I also want to change the look and feel of this table because this is really a priority point. We want to try to help find those animals a home. So let's try to make this table really push out to the users. We'll put a new title on here, we'll center it, make it boldface, and let's make it really big. And maybe even change the color to red. We'll save that. And then let's go into the cell styling and let's do some coloring on the rows. Let's color the odd and even rows different colors of red. So we can really identify and focus on those animals who need a home. We can view our table here. We want to focus in on those senior pets because we know we have several of those. We can see we've got a number of pets here who need a home. We can even sort this to see who's been at the shelter the longest. And here we can see Maxine has been at the shelter almost 700 days. Our goal today, when we started out to build this dashboard, was to be able to bring data together, to understand if we had enough supplies and kennels to accommodate for the trend of animals coming in via intake, and also be able to forecast the animals that are coming in. We wanted to be able to look at different key performance indicators around the average shelter stay, as well as a comparison of adoption metrics year over year. And we wanted to take the opportunity to be able to look at different attributes of these animals, age group, color, breed, and be able to try to glean some insights. Because ultimately our goal is to find these animals a home. And we can see by being able to identify this last table on our dashboard that there are a lot of animals out there that need our help. We've accomplished all this. Now we're ready to publish our dashboard and make it easy for our users to consume. So we're going to share our dashboard here in the top right of the blue bar. We're going to choose publish. We're going to publish it and we're going to give it a name. Now that that dashboard has been published, we're going to see what a viewer or a reader will see when they access the dashboard. And now we have to share that published dashboard with users. When we share that dashboard, you'll see we'll get taken to the screen where we can add either individual users or groups and choose to share this dashboard with them. So as I search for a particular user, I have the opportunity to add this user as a viewer or co-owner of this dashboard. So very easy to publish and share your dashboards once you have them developed and ready to go. Now that the dashboard is developed and shared with users and users are accessing the dashboard, what happens now? Well, typically, your users start wondering more. They start asking more questions. Questions like, I wonder, what are our intake metrics by intake type? Is age a factor in our intakes? And although we have age as part of our data and intake type as part of our data, it's not something that's created in a visual on our dashboard. What you can do with QuickSight is offer your users the ability to self-serve. You can provide self-serve analytics in the form of asking questions. Notice you can enable the Qbar, the QuickSight Qbar, across the top. And this Qbar can be enabled across dashboards. It can also be embedded on its own into other applications. And this Qbar allows users to ask questions across your data. In order to enable this, the author has to first set up a topic. So let's explore doing just that. Within QuickSight, you can create a topic. We'll create a new topic and give it a name. We first select a data set to build the topic on. And we have the first choice of a single data set, but you can build these topics on multiple data sets as well. So I'm going to go down to my shelter data. And please continue. This takes us into the area where we can configure our topic as the author. Notice we'll have a summary page so we can get some summary statistics over who's using the topic. If we've got any feedback provided, you have the opportunity to add additional data sets and set up your schedule to refresh that data. When we go into the Data tab of this is where you can actually do the topic configuration. And in the configuration, we can do things like include or exclude fields. So we're going to see all the fields that are available in our data set. So we can choose to include or exclude fields. We can add calculated fields and filters and something called a named entity. We also have the opportunity to rename fields. So just like we did in the data set of QuickSight, if we want to rename fields to a friendly name, we can do that here. Or we can set up synonyms for fields. So we've been focused a lot on this animal ID and doing a distinct count on animal ID to get the counts of intake type. So when we look at this particular field, we can set up a synonym, maybe just animals. So I can ask questions like, show me how many animals, and it's going to know to count animal ID. I also have the opportunity to go into the properties of each of these fields. And I know when we're looking about and counting animal ID, I always want to use a distinct count. So I can choose that as a default aggregation. As an author, I also have the opportunity to either allow or disallow other aggregations. I can choose my format and semantic type. So lots of flexibility with the ability to configure the actual topic in the fields. So now that we know we're going to count animals, maybe we want to add a calculated field or a filter. Let's add a filter, because we know users are likely going to ask things like who was adopted or how many animals that were seniors were adopted. So in order to find that out and allow them to ask that question, we're going to set up an adopted filter. And with the adopted, we're going to say the outcome type is a list that includes adopted as well as transfer and adoption. And I'm going to save that. So now we've created a filter for adopted. So we can ask how many animals were adopted. The other thing users might want to ask is, show me the animals show me animal details. And instead of having to ask for specific attributes or specific metrics, when I ask for animal details, I'd like for several different fields to come back. That's what a named entity is. It allows you to set up keywords that identify and tell QuickSight Q to bring back a number of fields. So when I ask for animal details, I'd like to see animal ID, animal name, probably age group, breed, and color. So I'll save this as my named entity. So now we did some basic configuration and are ready to start asking some questions. I will point out you do have a user activity and a reviewed answers tab. As an author, you're going to be able to see all the different questions that users ask, as well as have the opportunity to provide reviewed answers so they know that those questions have been asked and the answers verified. You'll share your topic with users just like you share dashboards. So very similar, you can share with users or groups. But for now, let's go back to our dashboard and see what this will look like for our readers. So I'm going back to my dashboard. This is the dashboard we just published that we built. And notice I have the Qbar enabled across the top. And the active topic, you can have multiple topics that you can access, but the active topic is this webinar live test that we just created. So now, after I've looked at my dashboard and I want more, I have the opportunity to go in and ask questions. So I can ask, how many animals by intake type since 2021? And even though a visual was not built on my dashboard, I have the opportunity to see the answer. So I can see the bulk of our intakes are coming in as strays. Well, I wonder what that looks like by age group. So I can add by age group to my question. And now I can see I get more detail. It's interesting in that stacked bar visual, but I'd like to see it in a different visual type. So even with the QuickSight Qbar, you have the opportunity to change your visual type. So here I can see stray is the primary intake type, and it is young adults coming in over 50% as strays. So very quickly I can get information and have it available to use. As a user, I can give positive or negative feedback based upon the answer that I've gotten. And finally, just to kind of round out, if I'm interested in looking at those animal details for individual animals, show me animal details for seniors who were adopted. And in order to find out the answer to this question, QuickSight looked at our adopted filter and knew we were selecting adoption and transfer adoptions, that we were interested in the senior age group, and animal details meant that I wanted all those fields that I selected in that animal details type. Now, if this is something I want to keep with me, I want to take with, I can export this to CSV or Excel, have it, and move forward. So a lot of flexibility with QuickSight, not only to build dashboards to help you users ask questions, to be able to navigate and interact, but also to allow users to self-serve, to not only answer the questions that are up today, but the questions that are there tomorrow as well. Thank you so much for your time today. I've really enjoyed spending the time with you, and I'm going to turn it back over to Jill, who will walk you through some next steps for QuickSight.
Thank you so much, Kelly. That was wonderful. And for everyone who attended today, we'd love to get your feedback, and also wanted to invite you to sign up for additional learning opportunities by visiting, again, the QuickSight community. And we do have an events page that lists all the additional topics that will be covered in subsequent sessions like this. And we look forward to seeing you either in the community and with any follow-up questions or at a follow-up event. Thank you so much. Have a great day.